Welcome back to the deep dive. For this deep dive, we're shifting gears a bit, moving past those big social structures that shape bias.
Yeah, today we're looking inward.
Exactly. We're focusing on the individual, the unique attitudes, the belief systems, the sort of internal psychological stuff that really shapes prejudice.
That's right. Our source materials today, they're all about individual differences. And they really push us to ask, what are the psychological mechanisms, cognitive, emotional, you name it, that decide who you're likely to accept and who you might reject.
Right.
So our mission here is to weave together the research on three core things: personal values, social ideologies, and the power of automatic emotions.
It's so easy to think of prejudice as just this external force, isn't it?
Yeah.
But this research really suggests the blueprints are often drawn right inside our own heads. So let's start at the foundation, values. When the research talks about values, what exactly are we nailing down here?
Well, basically, they're talking about core beliefs. Beliefs about the importance of goals, things we try to achieve, or maybe things we try to avoid.
Okay. And it's when those goals clash, that's where the trouble starts.
Often, yeah. That's where bias can really take root. The research consistently flags two main value orientations that heavily influence how we see outgroups.
Okay, what's the first one?
Individualism. Big emphasis on self-reliance, independence.
Kind of related to the Protestant work ethic idea, that hard work is the only way to succeed.
Exactly that. And if you really buy into individualism, you tend to look pretty negatively on any group that's stereotyped as, violating those principles.
Like groups may be seen as jobless or dependent.
Precisely. But just as important is the flip side, egalitarianism.
Right, the emphasis on equal opportunity, equal treatment for everyone, concern for others.
And this one seems to act almost like a psychological shield against bias.
Really? How so?
Well, the more someone endorses egalitarian values, the less prejudice they tend to show. Consistently.
Yeah.
It seems like that commitment to equality might actually stop negative stereotypes from even getting activated.
Interesting. So it nips it in the bud, almost.
Kind of, which leads us straight into the value difference hypothesis,
Okay.
which basically says prejudice often comes down to the simple perception that another group's values are fundamentally different from, or maybe even incompatible with, your own.
And the sources dig into a specific mechanism for that, don't they? The attribution value model, the AV model.
Spot on. The AV model, and it adds this crucial layer, accountability.
Accountability.
Yeah. It suggests prejudice starts when we perceive a minority group having characteristics that clash with majority values. We've sort of established that.
Okay.
But, and this is the kicker, prejudice really only results if that group is seen as being responsible for those negative characteristics.
Okay. So responsibility is key. Like if someone's unemployed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you attribute it to, say, systemic barriers, the model predicts less prejudice. But if you attribute it to laziness, something that directly violates that individualism value,
And the prejudice shoots way up.
skyrockets. Yeah.
So that perception of choice, or maybe control over the negative trait, that's the trigger for the hostility.
That seems to be the core of it.
And the sources mention this model works better for some groups than others.
Right. It seems most powerful for socially defined groups, where people see the members as pretty similar, like a political party or maybe an advocacy group.
Okay, not so much for groups defined more biologically.
Less so, yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind of implies the AV model needs some level of, rational thinking about accountability.
But what happens when things get less rational? When bias is driven by something deeper, more existential, like, say, the fear of death?
Well, that sets up terror management theory, TMT, perfectly.
Okay, TMT. What's the core idea there?
It starts with this fundamental conflict, right? We have this instinct for self-preservation. We want to live. But we also know intellectually that death is inevitable. And that conflict, the theory goes, creates this underlying terror.
Okay, sort of deep existential dread. How do we manage that?
Well, we build things. We create cultural institutions, worldviews, things that promise us either literal immortality, like through religious faith, or symbolic immortality.
Symbolic immortality, like being part of something lasting, a nation, a culture.
Exactly, a legacy. But here's the thing. When that core worldview, the thing giving you that symbolic protection, feels threatened by an outgroup with different values,
Uh-oh.
you get defensive.
Yeah.
You're motivated to protect your worldview by, well, putting down the challenging group,
Yeah.
derogating them, diminishing them.
And researchers actually test this, right, with those mortality salience experiments.
They do. They make participants think about their own death, maybe write about it. And consistently, when mortality is salient, people cling more tightly to their ingroups
Okay.
and show more hostility towards outgroups.
Right.
It's like a primal defense kicking in.
Wow, that's powerful. But it's not always doom and gloom, is it? There's a nuance.
There is, and it's crucial. That effect isn't set in stone. If, while people are thinking about death, researchers also reinforce anti-bias cultural values like tolerance, respect,
Yeah.
it can actually offset the prejudice effect, which really shows how powerful cultural messages can be, even when we're facing something as fundamental as death anxiety.
Which brings us right to religion. You mentioned it earlier. The sources say it's complex. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it hurts prejudice. What's the dividing line?
It seems to come down to prescribed versus permitted prejudices.
Prescribed versus permitted.
Yeah. Prescribed prejudices are those the religion explicitly forbids, like, say, stealing. Most religions have those.
Right.
But then there are permitted prejudices.
Okay.
So while many religions teach broad tolerance, that acceptance often has limits. It might only extend to people perceived to share the religion's core values. Prejudice is then sort of permitted against groups seen as violating those core beliefs.
And the research backs this up.
It does. It finds that overall religious involvement is pretty much uncorrelated with those prescribed prejudices. People generally follow the explicit rules.
Okay.
But religious involvement shows a moderate positive correlation with the permitted prejudices, the ones against groups seen as value violators.
Interesting. Let's quickly define the religious orientations mentioned. There's intrinsic belief.
Right. That's like truly internalizing the faith, a deep, genuine belief for its own sake.
And extrinsic. What's that?
Extrinsic is more about using religion for other goals, maybe social connections, security, a sense of belonging, non-religious benefits.
And how do those relate to prejudice?
Well, the data suggests that people with a more extrinsic orientation show a small positive correlation with prescribed prejudices, maybe using faith to draw social boundaries.
Okay. And intrinsic.
Intrinsic believers tend to show a small negative correlation with prescribed prejudices, maybe reflecting that internalized value of compassion.
Got it. And the last one was fundamentalism.
Yeah, fundamentalism believing in one set of absolute inerrant truths. That shows the largest positive correlation, specifically with those permitted prejudices.
So the takeaway feels like religious acceptance can be powerful, but it often operates within pretty strict boundaries, defined by who's seen as sharing those correct values.
That seems to be a fair summary. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. We've talked values, these deeply held personal beliefs. Now let's look at social ideologies.
Okay. How are these different from values?
Think of them as broader frameworks, sets of attitudes that help people make sense of the world, view it in certain ways. And importantly, they often satisfy deep psychological needs, giving us clear answers, maybe a sense of conviction. They act like filters for our worldview.
Right. And the two big ones linked to bias in the sources are right-wing authoritarianism, RWA, and social dominance orientation, SDO. Let's unpack RWA first.
Okay. RWA is usually defined by three core attitudes that tend to cluster together. First, authoritarian submission, basically. A high degree of obedience to established authorities within your own group.
Okay, respect for authority.
Second, authoritarian aggression, a tendency to lash out, reject, even punish people who violate traditional norms or are seen as deviants.
Right, and third.
Conventionalism, just a real rigid adherence to traditional values and norms.
So putting it together, RWA sounds like it's driven by a need for order, predictability, maybe safety. People high in RWA often see the world as dangerous, chaotic.
That's a key aspect, yes. Mental inflexibility, seeing threats everywhere. It's very much about security. If an authority figure condemns a group, someone high in RWA is more likely to see prejudice against that group as legitimate.
Okay, so RWA is about security, conformity, submitting to the in-group authority to stay safe from perceived threats. How does social dominance orientation, SDO, compare? Is that less about fear and more about power?
Exactly. SDO is fundamentally about dominance. It's the desire for your own group to be on top, to dominate and be superior to other groups. It breaks down into two main parts. One is that desire for group-based dominance itself, and the other is an active opposition to equality. A belief that hierarchies are natural and low-status groups should, well, stay low status.
And the personality traits associated with high SDO.
Tend to be things like being manipulative, lower in empathy, seeing the world as a competitive jungle, a zero-sum game where groups fight for resources.
And to keep that hierarchy in place, they use, what did the sources call them? Legitimizing myths?
Yes, legitimizing myths. So these are basically beliefs, attitudes, stereotypes, anything that serves to justify denying equality.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A classic one from the research is using a stereotype, say, that a particular group is unintelligent to argue against funding better education for them.
Ah, the justification being it would be a waste of resources because they supposedly can't benefit.
Precisely. It's a way to rationalize keeping the hierarchy intact. It's self-serving.
That distinction between RWA and SDO feels really important then.
It is.
RWA, driven by security, fear, conformity. SDO, driven by dominance, competition, hierarchy. Both can lead to prejudice, but for quite different underlying psychological reasons.
Absolutely. One fears the other changing things, the other wants to keep the other down.
Which inevitably leads us to the perhaps more sensitive topic, political orientation and prejudice. The research often shows links between conservative beliefs and prejudice, but it's complicated, right?
Very complicated, and the sources are careful here. Yes, correlations exist, but it's probably not a simple cause and effect thing.
What's the key finding that complicates it?
It's this. When researchers statistically account for RWA and SDO, basically, when they mathematically remove the influence of those two ideology scores,
Yeah.
the link between political orientation itself, like conservatism and prejudice, gets much, much weaker. Sometimes it disappears altogether.
Okay, so what does that suggest?
Well, it suggests that conservatism itself might not cause prejudice directly. Instead, it could be that people who are already high in RWA or SDO people, naturally drawn to security, hierarchy, maybe lower on egalitarianism, might find conservative belief systems, which often emphasize individualism over egalitarianism, a useful framework to, well, to justify biases they already lean towards.
So the ideology becomes a vehicle for expressing pre-existing tendencies rooted in RWA or SDO.
That seems to be the implication in much of this research. It's a justification system.
And more recent work acknowledges this isn't just a right-wing issue, right? The idea of bipartisan prejudice.
Absolutely. It's not a one-way street. The underlying mechanism seems to be perceived value conflicts, and that can happen across the political spectrum.
So how does that play out?
Well, research shows conservatives might feel threatened by groups they perceive as undermining tradition or authority, maybe liberals, atheists, LGBTQ plus individuals. The perceived value clash fuels negative feelings. Conversely, liberals might feel threatened by groups perceived as opposing equality or social welfare, maybe religious fundamentalists, certain corporations, or conservatives themselves. Again, it's the perceived clash of fundamental values that seems to drive the prejudice on both sides.
That makes sense. The emotion comes from feeling like your core way of seeing the world is under attack, which leads us perfectly into our third pillar, the automatic and emotional dimension.
Right, because a lot of this isn't conscious calculation. The sources emphasize that emotions often pop up automatically, maybe without us even realizing it, and they're incredibly powerful drivers of how we act towards others.
And the Boyne model here is the stereotype content model.
Yes, a really influential one. It suggests that our stereotypes of different groups generally fall along two main dimensions: how warm or friendly we perceive them to be, and how competent we perceive them to be.
Warmth and competence. Okay.
And the specific combination of high or low on these two dimensions triggers distinct emotional responses. This is really key for understanding the flavor of different prejudices.
All right, break down the combinations for us. What are the quadrants?
Okay, quadrant one, high warmth and high competence. Think of groups generally seen positively, like maybe the societal middle class or close allies. The emotion.
Admiration, respect.
Exactly, admiration, respect. Now, quadrant two, high warmth but low competence. Groups often stereotyped this way include the elderly or people with certain disabilities.
And the emotion there is?
Often pity, maybe sympathy, but frequently mixed with a subtle disrespect, seeing them as nice but incapable.
Okay. Now for the lower warmth categories. Low warmth, but high competence.
This is often where you find stereotypes of, say, highly successful minority groups or maybe groups seen as economic competitors. The sources mention examples like Jewish people or sometimes Asian people fitting this stereotype historically.
And the emotions, these sound like they could be negative.
They are. Often fear, hostility, maybe resentment, and crucially, envy. They're seen as capable but not trustworthy or on our side.
Right. And the final quadrant, Low warmth and low competence.
This is often reserved for the most stigmatized groups. Examples given might include welfare recipients, homeless people, groups seen as neither friendly nor capable.
And the emotional response here is the most negative.
By far,
Yeah.
it's typically contempt and disgust. It's quite stark, isn't it? How these two simple dimensions, warmth and competence, can map onto such specific and sometimes really dehumanizing emotions like pity, envy, or disgust.
It really is. It's like a quick, dirty psychological shortcut that sorts people into these emotional boxes.
And that emotion of disgust, it's not uniform. The research shows people who are just generally more sensitive to disgust, like find more things yucky, also report more negative attitudes towards groups they see as threatening their values. It shows how basic, almost visceral emotional responses can plug directly into social bias.
Wow. Okay, another big emotional factor mentioned is intergroup anxiety. What's that about?
It's basically that feeling of discomfort, unease, maybe even dread that people experience when they anticipate interacting with someone from an outgroup or when they're actually in that interaction.
What causes that anxiety? It's
Yeah.
not just dislike, is it?
No, it's often more complex.
Yeah.
It could be expecting negative consequences like fearing rejection from the outgroup member, or maybe worrying about being ridiculed by your own group for associating with them.
Oh, okay.
Or it could be embarrassment, fear of saying the wrong thing, making a social blunder. And very commonly today, it's the anxiety about appearing prejudiced, even if you don't think you are.
That meta anxiety, yeah, I can see that. And what does this anxiety lead to?
Well, like most anxiety, it motivates avoidance. People try to steer clear of interactions that make them anxious. And if avoidance isn't possible, it can sometimes lead to awkwardness or even hostility, sort of as a defense mechanism.
Is there anything that reduces it?
Yes, interestingly, the sources note it's significantly lower in highly structured situations.
Structured, like with clear rules.
Exactly. Think of maybe a formal meeting with a clear agenda or a structured debate. When the rules of engagement are clear, there's less room for social blunders or misunderstandings, so the anxiety tends to drop.
So TMT, RWA, SDO, this intergroup anxiety, there's a common thread here, isn't there? It all seems to circle back to maintaining psychological safety, keeping things simple and non-threatening.
That really seems to be a core driver running through much of this. Anxiety is fundamentally a signal that our sense of safety, our status quo, feels threatened by difference or uncertainty.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the drivers, but the research does point to one major emotional factor that works in the opposite direction, right? Something that actively reduces prejudice.
Yes, absolutely. And that's empathy.
Empathy, specifically perspective taking.
That seems particularly powerful, yes. Yeah. Empathy is an other-centered response. When you genuinely try to adopt another person's psychological viewpoint, see the world through their eyes.
What happens?
It tends to induce feelings of similarity. You start to see connections, common ground. It allows people to kind of link their positive views of themselves to members of other groups. It helps break down that us versus them wall.
So empathy actively counters both implicit and explicit bias.
The evidence strongly suggests it does. It's a potent force for reducing prejudice.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. We've explored these three big pillars: our fundamental values about what's right and wrong, the social ideologies we use to make sense of the world and feel secure, and these powerful, often automatic emotions like fear, disgust, anxiety, and empathy.
And it's clear they don't operate in isolation, right? They
Yeah.
interact, they influence each other, creating these really individualized patterns of bias. It's not just about hate. It's often about perceived value conflicts, desires for security or dominance, and managing uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah, the idea that so much prejudice stems from feeling threatened values, threatened safety, threatened status, rather than just simple dislike, that feels like a key insight. And seeing how anxiety and disgust can be such powerful engines driving avoidance and hostility, that's sobering too.
Absolutely. That pursuit of psychological safety and security seems to be the deep current running underneath so much of this, whether it's expressed through RWA's submission to authority, SDO's drive for dominance, or just the basic avoidance triggered by anxiety.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final, maybe provocative thought to chew on.
Okay.
If so much of this research suggests that our drive for security and safety, especially when defined rigidly around conformity and avoiding difference, actually fuels prejudice,
Mm-hmm.
and if our most powerful cultural structures, be they religious, political, or social, are often built, at least in part, to reinforce those feelings of safety and belonging within the group,
Then those structures might be inadvertently reinforcing bias.
that's the question, isn't it? If safety defined as sameness promotes prejudice, how can we start to redefine psychological safety in a way that genuinely makes room for difference, embraces it, rather than pushing us to avoid it or demand conformity?
That's a big question. How do we make difference feel safe, not threatening?
Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive.